Hey, everybody, welcome to the War of 1812, the final little piece of this short war. Only lasts a couple years, but has such huge implications for the United States and the world. So, this is really just the last little bit of the war, but it ties it all together in this video. So, when last we left, we were in the year 1814, and the British were upset because the Americans had beat them on Lake Erie, and the Americans had beat them in Canada. Tecumseh was killed, and the Native American resistance was breaking apart. So the next year, in August of 1814, the British get their revenge. Remember, they attack Washington, D.C., they burn lots of buildings, including the White House. But because of the tornado inside a hurricane, the fire is put out, and the British troops are damaged by the tornado. And so the British head up to Baltimore, Maryland, and it's going to take them a few weeks. But when they get there, it's about 40 miles or so. They move the army, and the Navy shows up to attack the American fort, Fort McHenry. This is in September of 1814, and this is the battle that gives us our national anthem. Francis Scott Key watched all night from a British boat as the British attacked the American fort. And by dawn's early light, the flag was still there, proving that the Americans had held out all night long and withstood the British bombing and attacks. So this was a high point for America, to withstand the British and to have the flag still flying. Of course, the poem would not become a national anthem for years later when it was set to music. But by this point in the game, in 1814, both the United States and the British were getting tired of fighting. A lot of the issues that had led to the war, such as impressment, had kind of been settled and were settling down. And so both sides were looking to really end the war. And so by the end of that year, December of 1814, that's an important point. The British and the Americans meet in Belgium, in Europe, a little country in Belgium. The city was called Ghent, Belgium. And they're both just worn out from fighting. No major victories on either side, so they just agree to stop fighting. No real change in territory. So in reality, it was pretty much a tie. However, the United States had now beaten the British one time during the American Revolution and fought them again in the War of 1812 and did not lose. So in a way, that's kind of like winning. So it's good for the United States. We get a little more respect. So you can see from this slide what it would have looked like at the treaty ceremony there in Ghent, Belgium, the British delegation and the Americans agreeing to stop the War of 1812 in December of 1814. Now, why does that matter? Well, because it's going to take weeks for the news of the treaty and the terms of the treaty to get back across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. And so in that time, there'll be another battle that's fought called the Battle of New Orleans. And from this battle, we will get the most famous hero of the War of 1812. Andrew Jackson will rise to be a hero and later become president from a battle that did not need to take place. So remember, all the people that would die in this Battle of New Orleans didn't have to die because technically the war was over. It's just the British and the Americans in the Louisiana area did not know it was over, and they were still in fighting mode. So the Battle of New Orleans between the United States and Britain in January of 1815. So after the war is officially over, this war is short and sweet, this 2-year war, but this famous battle takes place right after it ends, and it makes Jackson a national hero. This is down near the swamps of New Orleans in Louisiana. They thought they were still at war. And of course, how? They're not going to use pillows. Guns, cannons. But it's a decisive victory for the United States. Even though the battle didn't have to take place, it's kind of like a little cherry on top of the sundae for America. They'd survived the war, and now with one final battle, Andrew Jackson proves America is a force to be reckoned with. So we're going to be talking about Andrew Jackson more and more in American history, but it all begins here at the Battle of New Orleans. So you can see on this slide the coin that commemorates his presidency. He's the 7th president. This is the dollar coin. So again, this pattern of heroes becoming presidents. There were two from the War of 1812. William Henry Harrison and Andrew Jackson would both be generals during the war and later go on to be president. But this kind of brings to my mind this idea that what if they had known? What if they had the kind of communication that we have today? They would have known about the war being over. They could have read something on social media or on a website or a YouTube video, and they would have known. But they didn't have that luxury. Or perhaps it is a curse to know what's happening around the world, all the time. Maybe you have thought about FOMO. Do you ever fear that you're missing out on something? The fear of missing out. Fear of missing out is a real thing. Again, there's good parts to always knowing what's happening in the world, instantly knowing what's happening in, say, Russia or Ukraine or in China or in Australia or Brazil, all parts of America. We know it instantly. Our phones never stop. But is there a downside of the fear of missing out? Look at these symptoms here. Do you think you have any of these? Are you always on your phone? Do you feel like you're sleeping near your phone? Are you checking your phone in the middle of the night? Do you take pictures of things you really don't need to take pictures of? It is a real thing, and we live in this new phase of the information age where people can communicate instantly around the world. And if you feel like you're being cut off from that, it can cause some anxiety and stress. So Andrew Jackson did not have to worry about that, right? It took weeks for him to find out what was happening and that the war was really over, but this idea that communication would lag and it would take a while affected history because Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans did not have to happen. But it did happen and made him a hero, and it set America in motion in a certain direction where he will become president, and things he will do as president will shape the destiny of the United States. So as we wrap up this War of 1812, there are many things we could study. There are a lot of battles, a lot of people. But the basics, I think, could be boiled down to these 5 big events. The first, the Battle of Lake Erie in September of 1813. Oliver Hazard Perry and Don't Give Up the Ship really gave the Americans control of the Great Lakes. And then right after that, the Battle of the Thames up in Canada. William Henry Harrison is victorious. Tecumseh is killed, and that's the beginning of the end for the Indian group that would work with the British to fight the Americans. And then about a year later, when the British burned the White House and attack Washington, D.C. And then right after that, they march up to Baltimore and they attack Fort McHenry, but fail to take the fort, even though they bomb it all night long. But by dawn's early light, the Star-Spangled Banner, the flag, is still waving. So America survives the attack on Fort McHenry. And then the battle that did not have to be, number 5, the Battle of New Orleans in January of 1815, after the Treaty of Ghent. Andrew Jackson and the Americans have a decisive victory, and Andrew Jackson would become a war hero and go on to become president and change really the course of American history.